IVM.
Folks, welcome to Paisa Vaisa. I'm your host Anupam Gupta, P50 on Twitter. And on today's show, we have an API platform with us, a very interesting company. It's called YAP, YAP. And my guest, Madhusudanan R, co-founder at YAP. Madhu, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get started. Let's probably just get a bit of background to yourself and how did you get this interesting product going. We'll talk about the very brief background to you, your firm, and then we'll get into this, this big question that a lot of us have, that what exactly is the difference between fintechs and neobanks. But first, something about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Anupam. Thanks for having me on the show. This is more like one of those fanboy moments. I've been following you actively on your podcast and really look forward to this session over the next an hour or so. And it's a lovely Monday evening. It's pouring outside. Hopefully the networks don't fail us. But I think so we are a 5-year-old business. So we are. And I used to run products at Visa prior to this, and before that with Citi. My co-founder and I were colleagues at Visa, and over our coffee conversations, we sort of hit on this idea of starting up. And back in the day, 5-6 years ago, when we actually, were forming the hypothesis, we never really expected this company to be in this form and shape because the ecosystem then was very different. But I'm glad that until now it's sort of worked out for us. I'm happy to share those learnings as well as we sort of go along.
Excellent. So let's get this in perspective, right? Because on Paisa Vaisa, we've had a lot of fintech startups that have come our way. Some are in mutual funds, some are in insurance, and some are in lending. So that fintech space is quite clear that there are products and, they've been developed in such a manner that you could call it customer onboarding, the product delivery and all is really smooth. It could be a small case, could be a zero, that could be anybody. So those are fintech startups that address a certain, you could say a certain use case that is fairly well established. We've also had a few neobanks on our show, like an Open and a Finin. So, I just want to put YAP into perspective out here as to where does it fit in this space out here?
Sure. Yeah, I think, the way to sort of look at this is, a lot of the terms that you used are all oxymorons in many ways, right? It's classic to what we call as mobile in the network, right? We use it often together, but, it never goes together. Fintech is also one such term where technology never got into, financial services in the way it should have in other parts of our lives. So thereby there were new, cohorts of companies that came in to actually, build on the whole, profit pools that were available in financial services itself. Likewise, neobank as well, right? I mean, if I just went through your Twitter profile to just see something interesting, and it says neo is, I thought it wasn't real, right? And if you just apply that to banks, that's what neobank today in India is, right? I mean, it's something that is not a bank, but yet trying to be a bank, right? On a sort of serious note, I think the financial services...
Yeah, that's a reference to the matrix. Yeah, you're right.
Right. On the financial services side, you have a lot of work that is required from a customer adoption standpoint. I think where we are today as a world is everybody wants everything to be sort of rendered on the phone, and nobody has the time to actually go out and seek that product or service from a third-party location. You wouldn't remember the last time when you visited a branch. That was the last of our worries in the last 3 or 4 months when we have been sort of locked down, right? Because pretty much all our lives are going on, whether we want to order food or, grocery, everything happens on the phone, and the payment is increasingly sort of becoming invisible, and so should be the bank, right? Fintech in general is sort of described as something that is helping, putting technology into financial services companies. Likewise, neobanking is a subset of that, I would call it, where new breeds of companies that are coming into helping how customer could sort of experience it differently, right? It doesn't have a proper definition, but it's largely guided by regulation. Different markets have different meaning to it. But in India, it's typically, what we are seeing is, companies that are trying to, put customer at the center of a number of things. And how do you sort of drive up the whole engagement model and, the experience layer so that you don't regret about, having to go to a bank, right? So until now, it's still, very uncomfortable. I think in the order of magnitude, you would hate going to a dentist and a banker would probably be the top five most hated places for an individual to sort of visit, right? So I think so that thereby neobank as a phenomena, while it is relatively new, it should be looked at as something that is nicely sort of packaged and easy for the customer to use, and we'll have to wait and see how some of these companies actually execute on that.
It's really interesting. I mean, I like how you've taken quite a few concepts out there and packaged them into one. So help me out here. Where do you think the gaps are? Okay, because banking as a product towards a customer, I've the various guests that I've had on the show and my own personal experience, and as you correctly pointed out, I hardly go to a bank branch nowadays. But despite that, even the apps that I use, it leaves a lot to be, let's just say that once I use a fintech startup app and once I use my bank's app, the experience is really, really different. I mean, from very basic stuff like transferring money and stuff like that. And that's even evident, like if you use a Google Pay versus say your own bank's app and you want to do a UPI transfer out there, at least for me, I don't know about the listeners, I don't know about you and how you did, but it's huge, man. I mean, Google Pay is just so smooth and the others are not. So I want to get your perspective out here. Where are the gaps out here for a better user experience, better customer experience, or what's your take on this?
Yeah, I think if you actually, look at how, Steve Jobs' famous launch of the iPhone, right? He put out 4 large, trio and the most powerful smartphones that were out there in the world at that point in time, right? And he just sliced them without the screen and just showed the keyboards and said, how can this get better, right? I think from a product person's perspective, and a lot of the neobanks, and, we watch them very, very closely, is looking at it insanely saying, how do I simplify the life of my customer, right? So can I completely remove this keyboard and just make it a screen is what, Steve Jobs sort of claimed to Apple phone and iPhone success. And in 15 years, it's like the most valued company in the world. Likewise, in banking, in financial services, where trust is the foundational sort of layer, how do you make that whole experience simple and sort of elegant and something that you would love to come back to that app and sort of do it, right? It's not just about the app itself, but I think looking at it insanely, from a customer lens, is what is going to drive a lot of the use case adoption. It's in India, and there are global examples of this, right? Nubank, which is probably one of the most successful neobanks globally. They had built the whole bank based on just 2 insights. One was saying customers hated the customer support provided by the bank. The other was the fact that they were not getting a lot of the young generation of bankers never got access to credit. These were the 2 insights that they worked on. They delivered a superior product, and they are one of the rockstar companies in financial services globally, right? So, but if you come back to the Indian context, what Google has done is only a layer on top of whichever bank that you're banking with, whether it's HDFC or SBI or ICICI. And some of these banks have also done a reasonably good job in terms of putting out that product out there. But truth is, the way Google is looking at it from a customer centricity standpoint, and because by virtue of they being a consumer sort of brand, nobody else sort of has that kind of leverage. So thereby, it requires fresh thinking to come and look at what is this product, how can I simplify it, and you have a lot of challenges in just simplifying things to the user.
Okay, you mentioned about the global scene. You just mentioned a fairly. So I want to talk about that. How is the neobank concept evolving globally, and where is India on this? I'm asking this because UPI in India was, and still is among the fairly advanced payment systems in the world. But how do we fare on other parameters, and how is the neobank scene doing globally?
Yeah, I think there are 2 or 3 parts to this question, right? One is the fact that you have in the West, the concept of a neobank emanates from the fact that existing systems are highly inefficient, right? So in the US, for example, PayPal came into existence 20 years back with the promise of sending money in real time, right? 20 years out, it is still the same bad, clunky experience. When you send money, it doesn't reach the other side or the other bank, instantly. So the opportunities or the problem solving that banks doing there are, how do I get money to a customer in real time, right? Which in India we are already tech natives in that. Not make any better than what UPI is today providing. You cannot make it any cheaper than what UPI is providing. It's almost absolutely zero from a customer sort of standpoint, right? So while it is cast into the same sort of definition, the problem solving required in these different markets are very, very different, right? However, what lessons we can draw from some of the successful models from the West are the fact that around how do you lend to people who are new to credit, because credit in itself is like risk management. I need to weed out the bad apples from the good ones, and it's essentially cost of adverse selection that you have to manage to make sure that you are profitable, right? So thereby, what models have worked in the West is around how do you enable access to finance to someone? Can you make it a secure sort of credit product? Can you help customers save based on a certain goal? So if you want to, let's say, hypothetically, if you want to go on a holiday, can you help somebody, plan and save towards that goal? Give them some gamification options in the product that you're offering, so that as and when they achieve those goals, you have certain motivations that are given out to them. So there's a lot of learnings that Indian fintechs and Indian neobanks are applying, drawing from the West. But the opportunity set in India is very, very different because of the fact that the banks in India run on relatively new technology, right? So it's in all of India, private banks is less than maybe 2 decades old, right? So thereby, some of the banks are actually less than 5 years old, right? So thereby, some of them have relatively new tech, which allows them to actually innovate on top of relatively new tech stack, right? It's like saying, I have the last year's car, I probably can run faster than a car of 40 years ago, right? So that's a simple sort of analogy, right? So thereby, the banks in India today have a regulatory cover which doesn't allow anybody to come in and take a license at will. But in Europe, you could do that with just $250,000. You can apply for a e-money license, which is almost like a retail bank, and you can start offering payment products in most parts of Europe. But in India, that's not the case. So the rent seekers are the bank. So they continue to be sort of very important from a fintech journey standpoint. You could, as a company, come in and innovate on top of it, right? Which is a win-win. Customers will get excited with the product. The bank doesn't have to do too much from a tech standpoint, and the company that is sitting in middle can actually sort of make out of it, right, by just orchestrating this product.
Where do you think the gaps are in India? If I just talk about an India experience, like, when I look at the financial product side, for example, we've got mutual funds sorted. Today, if you want to buy or sell, you want to open a brand new account in a mutual fund, you want to start an SIP, the process is absolutely smooth. A lot of the apps have cracked this entire process. If you look at loans, I don't know where things are, but I think it's not as bad as it used to be at one point of time. If you wanted to take a loan, you had to go through a lot of procedures and documents and whatnot. Now I believe that the credit score itself can help you to do that. So where do you think the gaps still exist in India for a better customer experience for any financial product in general?
I think we are still not there, Anupam. I have a different view on this. I think what you and I are getting, we are probably the first 100 million people who are privileged and have access to everything on our phone, right? But if you and this is backed by data, right? I think if you look at every large consumer internet company in the country, right, it plateaus out at about 80 to 100 million people, right? Which is probably the top 10 cities, top 1 percentile of the customer base and things like that. But there's a lot more work to be done for the next 200, 300 million people. And that's where, I believe there's like a massive amount of scope for neobanks to come in and operate, right? And I say this with conviction because if you look at what, data has done to, to all of our lives, right? We have, us and, probably, the support system that you have around you in your house, right? Your maid or your driver, both consume the same content, right? So we all use, thanks to Geo maybe, to some extent, they all have access to a screen and they are consuming digital content, right? now that gap has got bridged in terms of how the access has to be enabled, right? And it used to be a classic case where people used to say bank branch managers don't want poor people to come in to their branches and crowd their branches, right? This used to be like a common gripe. But now with that whole phone likely to go into a phone, with the whole bank likely to go into a phone, you have a massive opportunity as to how you can build new products or distribute new products to customers who have never been served, right? And it's a classic case of what we see in large industries over maybe if not years, in decades, right? So I just brought an analogy to a car as an industry, right? It started with when you were in a cart, you have to take all supplies with you, right? And then cars came in, Ford started assembling units, and then you had fuel, spare parts, everything getting distributed. So people would think of banking as that car and the dealership kind of a network. Today, Tesla is coming in and actually challenging the status quo and saying, I will rebundle everything into one brand. I will create the whole network across the world where you can charge your car, and it's just one brand that needs to do everything, right? So banking is also going through this wave of unbundling and rebundling, which is happening, right? So you had services that were taken out, 10 or 20 years ago. You could go to a, co-brand partner to, if you go to a shopper stop, you will get a credit card being rendered there. Or if you go to a Jet Airways used to have like a credit card where the affinity of that brand was driving a decision on a financial services product for those who had access to it, right? And it's a very important sort of point, right? Where you will have brands driving a certain behavioral decision. Thereby, you will find in India, in a number of places, large household brands are also in financial services. TVS in Tamil Nadu, or there are many examples of that. Muthoot in Kerala, and
Bajaj Finance,
Bajaj, like for example. Because it's household name, there is an inherent trust, right? So thereby,
correct,
those cohorts of customers who are actually coming into financial services for the first time, the next 200 million people or 300 million people, is where the entire fintech action is likely to be, right? And thereby, a lot of these companies are now waking up to saying, how do I defend my business? How do I make sure that fintech doesn't come out and take away my customers? Because this is not a 1-year sort of relationship that got done with throwing a cashback. This is probably a generational sort of relationship, right? If the guy who's running a shop, he would have a relationship with that, Bajaj or the TVS branch manager at a personal level. They'll go for family weddings and things of that nature, right? So thereby, that is something that is very, fundamental to how some of these large, consumer businesses have been run beyond the tier one or beyond the first 100 million customers. At that intersection is where, India is extremely interesting. Thereby, you have all the global players doubling down in terms of investments and resources to actually see how they can sort of capture some of this, new wave of customers who are coming into the financial mainstream for the first time.
Understood. So folks, we'll take a small break out there. We'll be right back with Madhusudanan R, co-founder at YAP. And we're going to talk about YAP now specifically, what it does, where it fits in the overall fintech space, and a lot of other stuff. So don't get anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another awesome week on the IVM Podcast Network. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And speaking of Instagram, Niharika Pandey joined Cyrus this week on Cyrus Says. Niharika is the strategic partner manager for Instagram India. Great conversation about the plans for Instagram in India. Karanjit Kaur joined the guys at Uncle Please Sit. Another really interesting conversation about the patriarchy. On Advertising is Dead, old friend Suchita Salwan showed up. Suchita is the founder of LBB. Great conversation she had with Varun. Definitely do check that out as well. Tanvi Lad, who is a nationally ranked badminton player, was on the Habit Code with Ashton Doctor. Great conversation. I would highly, highly recommend that. The Football Shitwall guys are back. They've been back for a few weeks, but definitely do check out their latest episode. Great, great conversation they had. On Aditi Surana's Absolutely Right, Manju Sara Rajan was the guest, and again, a great conversation was to be had over there. As always, great conversations all across the board. Check out some of the other stuff like Smile India and Know Your Kanun and All Things Policy. All of them had fresh episodes this week, but with that, let's get you back to your show.
And folks, welcome back to this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Madhusudanan R, co-founder at YAP. In this part of the episode, we're going to talk about YAP specifically. So Madhu, welcome back. What is YAP? I mean, first I need to. Do you have a full form of YAP? So first I want to start there. Then take us into the genesis. How you got this entire platform up. Your website, for example, says it's an API platform. And third, you've been in the news. You've had a recent funding round in April. So let's just walk through these two or three things to introduce YAP to our listeners.
Sure. Yeah. So YAP is the reverse of pay. So we kind of said we will, true to being, the rush of youth. We said we will change the whole world upside down. So we started with the name. So YAP is actually the reverse of pay. And we've been around for like 4-5 years. When we started out, there was a number of payments company that were there. Wallet was was the most preferred payment method. A lot of VCs were pouring in a lot of money into that. So we kind of said, this is all too good to be true, right? So thereby, we had a fundamental belief that payments at the core should make money at a transaction level. So if you don't make money at one transaction, how is it possible for you to make at millions of billions of transactions? So we couldn't digest that whole aspect of high growth based on an external stimuli. So we resisted fundraising for a few years until we truly believed that and had the conviction to go out and take somebody else's money to grow the company. And we probably had taken a bit longer than what we had planned for. But some of our customers executed really well. So we were bootstrapped for the first little over 4 years, and we ended up raising earlier this year. What the company does, Anupam, is essentially when businesses start looking to add financial services as part of it, think of what used to happen before AWS came into picture, right? A lot of the companies that want to rent servers, they used to spend disproportionate amount of time and resources in buying hardware, putting up in a data center, wiring it up, and so on and so forth. It used to take like 6 to 8 months, maybe 50-60% of all the monies that you raise as a startup to actually put your infrastructure up, right? In the financial services domain, the same thing happens where the servers are actually bank licenses. So it's limited in sort of availability with a bunch of banks, and getting to make them work is really hard. So what we simply do is we have arrangements with banks where we make sure that there are rules of engagement that are defined with the bank partner, so that we are able to go whenever there's a fintech that wants to launch a product or service, we're able to sort of smoothen out that process and really do it like what AWS is doing today to launch a server almost in real time, right? So essentially we are that layer that is helping companies to adopt banking and financial services in a simplified way, so they don't have to deal with banks, they don't have to deal with regulatory aspects. They can simply focus on their business and worry just about integrating with us and going live and focusing on the core.
Okay, so there are two things out there that I want to just take to our listeners. One obviously would be, who are your clients? And no, I don't mean them in the form of names per se, but you just mentioned banks as ones. So what part of the Indian BFSI industry do you serve? Are there banks? Are there mutual funds? Are there insurance companies? Blah blah blah. That's the first question. And the second is, if I'm a customer, let's say, so how do I know that YAP is behind this? What would be the most obvious thing for me, to know, okay, this is a product that YAP makes?
Yeah, so we are as I said, we are a layer that sits between banks and businesses. So it could be any regulated entity that is offering financial services. Today we have banks. We work with mutual fund houses. We work with we're trying to work with insurance companies. So thereby any regulated product that's out there, which is hard for a just born company to go and work with because of their credentials or whatever it is where we come in on the supply side, right? So I call that as a regulatory supply side. The demand side comes from companies that are trying to adopt some of the regulated products, right? So it could be guests in your shows like a Finin is a client of ours, and Open is a client of ours. These are companies that are trying to solve for a customer. So whoever is their customer, they could be up to solving some financial services product, opportunity with their customer. How does that interface with the bank, right? That's where we come in. We are a layer between that bank that is providing a product and the last mile, distribution or the fintech partner, as we call it, and them, right? So that's where we come in. You don't see us as a consumer brand. We are pretty much like Intel Inside. We just sit in and power the whole thing.
Okay.
And we just we just make sure that we are as efficient as we could be.
Fantastic. So that's that also gives me perspective as to where you fit in the overall neo-banking structure. When I look at your website, you're everywhere. I mean, if I just look at, you're there in payments, you're there in lending, you have multi-currency, neo-banking. I mean, so is there any part of payments or the BFSI where you're not present? Because this circle that you've got on the website seems to me that you're everywhere.
Yeah. So we today are a bank in a box, without the banking license, right? So any business. So actually, the beauty of this is that it's not just new fintech companies that are actually leveraging our platform. We have very large, consumer internet businesses, or large, NBFCs, some of them whom I named earlier, are all sort of looking to see how they can move up the value chain, right? How they can be seen by their customers that are digitally enabled. So there's this urge, thanks to the fintech action that is happening in the ecosystem, for a lot of incumbent, businesses to actually move up the value chain and offer, digital products to their customers. So we actually power up those companies as well, right? So in many ways, we serve both the disruptors and the disrupted, right? So companies that are likely to be sort of disrupted. And we are right now betting on both horses. Whichever wins, we hopefully we sort of carry the pot of food.
Got it. So what would be your two largest areas where you are present? Because when I see your website, you've got, for example, you speak about a neo-banking product, you talk about Tatkal, you talk about Fleet, which I guess is for logistics. So where would be your top 2 or 3 areas that you guys specialize in?
So very clearly there is India from an access to credit standpoint has a lot of unmet demand. So we have dozens of companies that are solving for it on our platform. So on the digital lending itself, I'll probably have like 6 or 8 companies that are doing it at scale now. We've been around for like 2-3 years. So lending and how money and today we are in a world where if you're on Flipkart trying to buy a refrigerator, that is no longer a consumer durable loan, right? It can be offered in EMI. Typically in the old world where you go to a shop, let's say a Vijay Sales, and you want to pick up a refrigerator, that gets booked in the bank's book as a consumer durable loan, right? Today when you're shopping on Flipkart, that lines are getting blurred in terms of what kind of line or what kind of lending is happening online, right? So thereby, we see that lines blurring, and in a way that customers, it doesn't matter who the lender is or what the product is being purchased, as long as you're able to convert a transaction by using lending as a vehicle. We have a lot of takers for that, right? So lending is one key property that we are building, and we are trying to see how we can make it better, make it simpler from our own Rails perspective, so that when the surfacing of it becomes simpler. That's one big area. The other area that we are looking to do in a meaningful work is around what you just articulated around Fleet, which is India is going through a formalization of logistics as a space, right? Thanks to GST over the last couple of years, a number of players in a logistic ecosystem, which is a trucker, and all of them are getting formalized, right? Because there is no value in not showing your income in your books, because GST captures all of it. So thereby they are getting formalized. So the amount of action that's happening on the fleet side is significant. We play a lot of work. We are doing a lot of work in that with ecosystem partners, with fintechs or with logistic companies in that space to build up that whole value chain. So these are 2 key areas of focus for us. Of course, Neobank is there. Neobank, we don't do a lot of work. Hopefully they'll end up doing terrific work for their customers to actually see for themselves in terms of how that product is going to shape up and help save time and make their life better.
So last 2 questions. First is how have you performed during this entire crisis? Probably before that, during, and now. How are you seeing things now? So that is the first one. And second is I believe that you're also present outside India. So if you could just wrap up the episode with these two aspects, your recent performance and, how has the international business fared versus the India business?
Yeah. So I think we went into COVID, much like every other business, blindfolded. It took us like a month for us to figure out what was happening. But having said which, I think there are areas where we obviously had a lot of business that were on the travel services side. So companies that are solving for people who are traveling abroad, that naturally has taken a hit. It's ground to zero. And likewise, lending, which was our second largest category, obviously, lenders rightfully to make sure their business, sort of survives. They slowed down on new lines of distribution and all that. So that kind of slowed down, but hopefully as economic activity returns, it should sort of come back. But there are other areas where, we do power up, some of the companies that are in the distribution space and all. So those, examples have actually sort of adopted much faster. And the lockdown has also helped some of the fintechs to actually go out and build the whole product experience better. There's a lot more focus on the product development side. So thereby number of businesses have, amplified their, product use case developments. So it's been a mixed bag for us as far as COVID is concerned. But, surprisingly, we had, to the international sort of plans, we aspired to be a company that got built out in India. So our roots are, we are a Chennai-based company, which is possibly the SaaS capital for the country. So several startups that, built out as SaaS companies have gone on to, become large companies globally. Likewise, we just wanted to be one of those companies that actually, is based in India, develop everything here and potentially ship out products for other markets. We are today in about 5 or 6 markets. Interestingly, in COVID, we converted a, sale in Australia, New Zealand. We got the whole contracting done without meeting the customer. We have gone live it's in beta. So COVID in that ways, we have been sort of really fortunate to convert this. Otherwise, it would have meant like 2-3 trips down to, to Australia to complete that sale. So it's been sort of a blessing in disguise. We are today a pan-Asia sort of player. We are present in 5-6 markets, hopefully in about 15 markets in the next year or two.
Understood. And how have you been seeing the international business versus the local business panning out?
So international is very, so India is today looked up as the, at least on the payments side, as a leader globally, right? So the platforms that we have built in this market, people attribute a lot of value because it's open, it's relatively inexpensive to run. So there's a lot of appetite for, companies that are, based and built in India to look at the solutioning and how we can help them. Obviously, when we look at other markets, Southeast Asia as a block, if you look at very similar demographic profiles, and whatever we build here for lending can get ported to those markets. We are evaluating a bunch of markets there. Likewise, in West Asia is very similar. India, Bombay, somebody works and sends money back home into Bihar or UP. Exact same customer, when they move up in life, they go to Dubai and send money back to the village in India, right? The use case is the same, the currency is different. So thereby we are, sort of looking at these, money flows and saying, what is the inefficiency there? How can we make it better? And that's the journey that we are in currently.
Interesting. So that's a wrap, folks, on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. My guest, Madhusudanan R, co-founder at YAP, which, as we learned, is pay the other way around. Honestly, Madhu, I thought that would be, some very fancy short form or something. So we just pay the other way around, is it?
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
Thank
folks. So that
much,
is, thanks a lot for joining us on this episode of Paisa Vaisa. Madhu, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
No material on the show should be considered as financial advice. The material on the show is for informational purposes only. Please consult a financial advisor before taking any investment decision.
Remember the last vacation you took? What about the one you took 3 years ago? Okay, how much do you really remember? It's a question I've asked myself often over a decade of traveling the world. Hey, I'm Utsav and I do not travel the world for a living. I have a full-time job and responsibilities, but I have made traveling the world a priority. Priority enough that I negotiate extra leave in my job contracts, obsessively track my frequent flyer miles, and I'm willing to take off at the sight of a cheap ticket. Yes, I am cheap. I have lived and worked in 3 countries. I understand human behavior for a living. And these experiences have given me unique insights into places, people, and culture. With over a decade of travel behind me, I increasingly realized one thing, that we cannot see everything. So whatever we see, we must see deeply. Because as the film of memory decays, the imprints which will stand the test of time are the ones felt by the immersion of the senses, not by fleeting encounters with them. Postcards from Nowhere is an immersion into the world of slow travel, one story at a time. Tune in every Thursday on the IVM Podcasts app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
रिश्ते में तो हम तुम्हारे पॉडकास्ट लगते हैं. नाम है फुटबॉल शुटबॉल.
Presenting Football Should Ball, a show about 3 friends discussing our favorite game over a beer. Sometimes 3, maybe even 5. Hi, I'm Shiva, and with me are my 2 sidekicks, Gaurav Sapre and Karthik Iyer.
Sidekick? You mean like Batman's Robin or Van Persie Robin?
No, I mean like Alexis Sanchez, but with a little more skill than just playing the piano.
Just shows how the best players at Arsenal are mere bench warmers at United.
Oh, thank you, Iyer. But you're a Fulham supporter, so whenever you say anything to support me, I question my beliefs.
Just like how Griezmann would say, एक बार मैंने जो decision ले लिया, तो मैं अपने आप की भी नहीं सुनता.
Banter aside, we will talk match reports, transfer rumors, top controversies, fantasy football picks, and so much more. So grab a beer and tune in to Football Should Ball every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcasts.